When resilient entrepreneur Sophia Lane steps into the city's most exclusive restaurant to celebrate her 55th birthday, she expects a night of joy and reflection on her hard-won success. Instead, she's met with cold stares, dismissive service, and an outright refusal to serve her. Humiliated but unbroken, Sophia makes one call to her son, Elijah, a former basketball star with an unshakable sense of justice. What begins as a confrontation between Elijah and the restaurant staff spirals into a viral scandal that ignites nationwide discussions about race, privilege, and belonging. But as the spotlight intensifies, Sophia uncovers a devastating connection to the restaurant's owner, a man from her past whose secret resentment may have shaped more of her struggles than she ever realized. In a gripping journey of resilience, justice, and redemption, The Weight of Silence explores the unbreakable bond between a mother and son, the power of community to demand change, and the courage it takes to rewrite the narrative of your life. The truth will come out, but can Sophia and Elijah turn their pain into purpose before the weight of the past silences them forever? The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of Sophia Lane's bedroom, casting golden streaks on the polished hardwood floor. She stretched her arms above her head and sighed deeply, savoring the luxury of waking up without an alarm. Today was her birthday, a milestone. Sophia slid out of bed and padded to the kitchen. The warm aroma of hazelnut coffee filled the air as she poured herself a steaming cup. Her eyes fell on the bouquet of vibrant roses sitting on the counter, the card tucked between them unmistakably from her son, Elijah. "To the strongest, most beautiful woman I know," it read. "Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Elijah." Sophia smiled, tracing the bold handwriting with her fingers. She thought of Elijah, her towering son, once a mischievous little boy, now a man others looked up to in every sense of the word. As she sipped her coffee, her thoughts turned to the evening ahead. Tonight, she would celebrate at Le Miroir, an exclusive restaurant she had dreamed of visiting for years. "This is my time," she whispered to herself. The restaurant gleamed under the soft glow of city lights, its towering glass windows reflecting the bustling streets. Sophia stepped out of her car, her navy dress shimmering faintly in the light. "Good evening, ma'am," the valet greeted her, though his smile faltered briefly. Sophia noticed the hesitation but brushed it aside, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached the entrance. Inside, the ambience was breathtaking. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and soft piano music playing in the background. Sophia approached the host stand, her head held high. "Reservation for Lane," she said with practiced poise. The hostess glanced at the list and hesitated. "Could you spell that for me?" Sophia repeated her name, though her gut told her it wasn't necessary. After an awkward pause, the hostess nodded. "Right this way." Sophia followed her through the elegant dining room, where she noticed other patrons seated near large windows or close to the piano. Her table, however, was tucked near the kitchen doors. She hesitated briefly but decided not to make a scene. "Enjoy your meal," the hostess said with a polite but perfunctory smile. Sophia sat down, adjusting her napkin. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. A waiter finally approached, pouring water without making eye contact or introducing himself. He placed a bread basket on the table and left before Sophia could order. Sophia reached for a piece of bread and frowned. It was cold and slightly stale. She glanced around the room, watching other tables receive attentive service, servers chatting warmly with diners as they presented dishes with flourish. Her stomach tightened. She tried to catch the attention of a passing waiter, raising her hand slightly, but he turned away as if he hadn't seen her. "This is not how I imagined tonight," she murmured to herself, her unease growing. After what felt like an eternity, Sophia finally flagged down the manager. He approached her table with a forced smile. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I assist you?" Sophia kept her tone steady. "I've been waiting for quite some time, and no one has taken my order. Is there a reason for the delay?" The manager's smile faltered. "I do apologize. Unfortunately, the chef has concerns about meeting your preferences tonight. We'd be happy to prepare something simpler or cancel your reservation if you'd prefer." Sophia stared at him, stunned. "My preferences?" "Yes," he said, his voice tinged with condescension. We aim to maintain the highest quality for all our guests." The implication was clear. Sophia's hand tightened around her napkin as heat rose to her cheeks. She took a deep breath. "I'd like my check," she said quietly. The manager gave a curt nod and walked away. Sophia sat there for a moment, her heart pounding. This wasn't just about bad service. It was about being made to feel small in a place she had every right to be. Outside in the cool night air, Sophia leaned against her car, clutching her purse tightly. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she stared at the screen, Elijah's name glowing on the display. "He's busy," she muttered, shaking her head. "I shouldn't bother him with this." But the memory of the manager's dismissive tone lingered, stinging like a fresh wound. She pressed the call button before she could second-guess herself. "Mom?" Elijah's deep, reassuring voice answered on the second ring. Sophia's throat tightened. "Elijah, I need you to come here." "What happened? Where are you?" Her voice trembled as she gave him the name of the restaurant. I need you." "I'm on my way," he said without hesitation. As Sophia ended the call, a sense of relief washed over her. She straightened her shoulders and wiped at the corners of her eyes. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. Elijah Lane's SUV came to a halt in front of the restaurant, the bright lights casting a sharp glare against the sleek black vehicle. He stepped out, his 6 feet 8 inches frame immediately commanding attention. The valet glanced at him, eyes wide, and stepped back instinctively. Elijah ignored the stares from the sidewalk and walked purposefully toward his mother, who stood near her car. Her navy dress shimmered under the streetlights, but her shoulders sagged slightly, betraying her exhaustion. "Mom," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "What happened?" Sophia tried to smile but failed. "They wouldn't serve me, Elijah. The chef refused to make my meal. They treated me like I didn't belong." His jaw tightened. "Where's the manager?" "Elijah," she began, but he interrupted. "No, you don't deserve this. Let's go." Before she could protest, he guided her toward the entrance. The moment Elijah entered, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations at nearby tables hushed, and heads turned toward him as he strode across the marble floor. Sophia followed hesitantly, her heels clicking softly against the tiles. The manager, a wiry man in his 40s, approached quickly, his forced smile faltering when he saw Elijah's imposing frame. "Good evening, sir. How can I help?" "You can start by explaining why my mother was treated like she didn't deserve to be here," Elijah said, his voice calm but sharp. The manager blinked, then glanced nervously at Sophia. "I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Elijah cut him off. "You sat her near the kitchen, ignored her for over an hour, and then refused to prepare her meal. That's not a misunderstanding. That's disrespect." "Sir, our chef had concerns about meeting her preferences." "Preferences?" Elijah's voice rose slightly. "My mother has been cooking her own meals longer than you've been alive. Don't insult her intelligence by blaming her preferences." The diners nearby exchanged murmurs, some pulling out their phones to record. The manager shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the growing audience. The manager, desperate to defuse the situation, gestured toward the kitchen. "Perhaps it would be best if you spoke directly with the chef." "Bring him out," Elijah demanded. Moments later, the chef appeared, a stout man with a graying beard and a defensive posture. He wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes narrowing as he took in Elijah's towering figure. "What's the issue?" the chef asked brusquely. Elijah stepped closer. "The issue is that you refused to serve my mother." "Why?" The chef crossed his arms. "I didn't think the dish would meet her expectations. We take pride in what we serve, and I didn't want to risk it." "Risk what?" Elijah's voice was low but dangerous. "Risk treating her like everyone else in this room? Because it looks like you didn't have a problem serving anyone else." The chef hesitated, his bravado faltering under Elijah's piercing gaze. "I was just doing my job." "No," Elijah said firmly. "Your job is to cook, not to judge who deserves to eat here." The room was now eerily silent, all eyes on the confrontation. One of the diners stood up, phone in hand, clearly recording. "You tell them," A voice called from the back, breaking the silence. The manager paled, glancing around the room at the growing number of phones pointed in his direction. "Sir, I think we can resolve this privately," the manager said, his voice wavering. "Privately?" Elijah scoffed. "You humiliated my mother in front of everyone here. Now everyone here is going to see how you fix it." The murmurs grew louder, and the manager's composure cracked. "Mr. Lane, I'm sure we can come to an agreement. Perhaps we can comp her meal." Elijah stepped closer, towering over him. "This isn't about a free meal. It's about respect. Something you clearly don't know how to give." Sophia placed a gentle hand on Elijah's arm. "Elijah, let's go." "No, Mom. Not yet." He turned back to the manager. "You're going to apologize. Not just to her, but to everyone in this room. Because they all saw how you treated her, and they deserve to know this isn't going to happen again." The manager stammered, but the weight of the public's gaze forced him to nod. I apologize, ma'am. This was unacceptable, and it won't happen again." Sophia stared at him for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she nodded slightly and turned to Elijah. "We're done here." Elijah hesitated, his fists clenched, but he finally exhaled and nodded. "Let's go." As they walked out, the silence broke into scattered applause from the diners. Sophia kept her head high, her dignity intact despite the humiliation she had endured. Outside, Elijah placed a hand on her shoulder again. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Mom. I won't let it happen again." Sophia gave him a small, tired smile. "I know, Elijah, and I'm proud of you. But this isn't over." "Not yet." They climbed into the SUV and drove off, the glow of the restaurant lights fading behind them. Sophia stared out the window, her thoughts already turning to what would come next. Elijah's phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen counter. The bright light illuminated Sophia's tired face as she sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. She hadn't slept. Her mind replayed the humiliation from the night before, interspersed with flashes of Elijah's defiant stand. "Elijah," Sophia said, her voice low, "why is your phone going crazy?" He walked in from the hallway, his hair freshly cut and his face set in determination. Picking up the phone, he frowned at the notifications. "Someone filmed what happened," he said, scrolling through social media. "It's already blowing up." Sophia reached out, her hand trembling slightly. Elijah handed her the phone, and she watched the shaky video capturing his confrontation with the manager and chef. The caption read, "This is what happens when you mess with a strong mother and her son. Respect everyone." The video had already amassed thousands of views. The comments ranged from supportive to skeptical. "They're calling you a hero," Sophia said, though her tone was wary. "And some are calling us overreacting," Elijah replied, setting his jaw. "I've been here before, Mom. People don't like it when you push back." Sophia nodded slowly. "But this time, it's different. This isn't just about us. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel small." By midday, Sophia's phone was ringing nonstop. Journalists, old friends, and even strangers were reaching out. Elijah turned on the TV, and a breaking news segment flashed on the screen. "Viral video sparks debate. Discrimination at elite restaurant?" The banner read. A polished anchor recounted the events, weaving in the footage from the night before. "I didn't ask for this," Sophia murmured. "But it's here," Elijah said firmly. "And we need to decide what to do with it." Sophia exhaled. "Do we go public? Speak to the media?" "You tell me, Mom. This is your story. I'll follow your lead." Sophia looked at her son, his loyalty evident. "Let me think," she said, her mind racing with the weight of responsibility. The next morning, Elijah's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Mr. Lane, this is Henry Darrow," the voice said smoothly. Elijah's eyes narrowed. "The owner of Le Miroir?" "Yes. I wanted to personally apologize for the incident involving your mother." Elijah leaned against the kitchen counter. "An apology now, after the video's gone viral? Convenient timing." "I understand how it looks," Henry replied, his tone unflappable. "But I assure you, this is genuine. I'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss how we can resolve this matter privately." Elijah clenched his fist. privately? You're not worried about fixing the culture at your restaurant? You just want the heat off your back?" Henry hesitated. "I'd like to work with you and your mother to make amends. A public apology, perhaps?" Elijah's lip curled. "We'll think about it." He hung up without waiting for a reply. Sophia, who had been listening nearby, looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think he's trying to cover his tracks," Elijah said. "We should be careful." That evening, Sophia sat alone in the living room, flipping through a worn photo album. She paused at a black and white photo of herself as a young woman, standing in front of a rundown building with a man in a crisp suit beside her. The man was Henry Darrow. She hadn't thought of him in years, but now the memories came rushing back. Henry had been the son of a wealthy businessman in her hometown, always charming but condescending. He'd once promised to help her secure a job when she was struggling, only to sabotage her opportunity behind the scenes. "He's the same man," Sophia whispered, "always pulling strings to keep people like me in our place." She closed the album, her determination hardening. "Not this time, Henry." The next morning, Sophia joined Elijah at the community center where he mentored local youth. As they walked inside, a group of young people surrounded them. "Mrs. Lane, you're inspiring people," one of them said. "We saw the video. Thank you for standing up." Sophia felt a wave of emotion. "This isn't just my fight," she said, looking at the young faces around her. "It's all of ours." Elijah nodded. "If we push together, we can make real change." That evening, Sophia and Elijah sat at the kitchen table, drafting a plan. They decided to demand more than a public apology. They would push for policy changes at the restaurant and use the platform to advocate for broader inclusivity. "This isn't just about us," Sophia said, her pen pressing firmly against the paper. "It's about everyone who's been silenced." Elijah smiled at her. "Let's make some noise, then." The living room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. Sophia and Elijah sat at the kitchen table, a stack of notepads and a laptop between them. Sophia scribbled on a legal pad while Elijah tapped away at the keyboard. "First things first," Sophia said, setting her pen down. "This can't just be about what happened to me. We need to focus on a broader impact." Elijah nodded. "Agreed. But we need a clear plan. Public pressure is already building, and we have the leverage. The question is, how do we channel it?" Sophia leaned back, her fingers rubbing her temples. "We start with the restaurant. A public apology isn't enough. They need to change their policies, permanently. And if they don't?" Elijah asked, his voice calm but firm. "Then we escalate," Sophia replied. "Media, protests, community action. We're not backing down." Elijah smiled faintly. "I like the sound of that." The next morning, Sophia and Elijah arrived at Le Miroir for a scheduled meeting with Henry Darrow. The restaurant was eerily quiet, its once busy dining room now devoid of patrons. Henry greeted them at the door, his demeanor polished but strained. "Sophia, Elijah, thank you for coming." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Sophia said, stepping past him into the dining room. They sat at a table near the window, the same spot Sophia had been denied. Henry's face tightened as he took a seat across from them. "I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened," Henry began. "It was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility." Elijah crossed his arms. "Responsibility is great, but what are you actually doing to fix it?" Henry cleared his throat, glancing at the papers in front of him. "We've terminated the staff involved and are reviewing our training policies. We're also prepared to make a donation to a charity of your choice as a gesture of goodwill." Sophia leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "You think a check and a few firings will erase the culture you've built here? This isn't just about bad employees, Henry. It's about the system you've put in place. That starts with you." Henry's jaw tightened. "What are you asking for, Sophia?" Sophia glanced at Elijah, then back at Henry. "I want you to host an event here. A dinner for people who faced the same kind of treatment I did. Open your doors to them. Hear their stories and commit to real change." Henry hesitated, his discomfort visible. "That's a big ask." "You're in no position to bargain," Elijah said flatly. After a long silence, Henry nodded. "Fine, we'll do it." Back at home, Sophia and Elijah began planning the event in earnest. "It can't just be a dinner," Sophia said. pacing the living room. It needs to mean something. A platform for people to speak, to share their stories. Elijah tapped his pen against his notebook. We'll need speakers, community leaders, activists, and we'll have to make sure the press is there to document everything. And it can't just be symbolic, Sophia added. We need commitments, real changes that come out of this. Elijah grinned. Mom, I think we're about to shake things up. Sophia smiled, her resolve firm. Good. It's about time. The following week was a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and planning sessions. Sophia reached out to local activists and community leaders, while Elijah connected with journalists and influencers to amplify their message. One afternoon, they met Jasmine Carter, a young woman who had faced discrimination in high-end boutiques. Mrs. Lane, Jasmine said, shaking Sophia's hand, what you're doing is incredible. People like me need this. Sophia smiled warmly. People like us, Jasmine. This isn't just my fight. It's all of ours. By the end of the week, the guest list had grown to include activists, community members, and even a few politicians. The event was shaping up to be more than just a dinner. It was becoming a movement. As the event drew closer, the backlash began. Critics accused Sophia and Elijah of exploiting the situation for attention. Social media was filled with both support and scorn. One evening, Elijah stormed into the kitchen, his phone in hand. Mom, have you seen this? People are saying we're just stirring the pot for publicity. Sophia took the phone and scanned the comments, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she set it down. Elijah, she said quietly, we knew this would happen, but we're not doing this for them. We're doing it for the people who don't have a voice. Elijah sighed, his shoulders relaxing. You're right. I just hate seeing you attacked like this. Sophia placed a hand on his arm. I've been through worse, and I'm not stopping now. As they continued their preparations, Sophia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was difficult, but she was ready to face it. Together, she and Elijah would make sure their voices, and the voices of others, were heard. The day of the dinner had arrived. Sophia stood in the middle of Le Miroir, now nearly unrecognizable. Gone were the towering, imposing chandeliers and cold decor. Instead, the dining room had been transformed into a warm, inclusive space. Soft, golden lights cast a gentle glow, and round tables were adorned with simple yet elegant centerpieces of wildflowers. Sophia took a deep breath as Elijah approached her. It looks good, he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. Feels different. It feels like it belongs to everyone, Sophia replied. For the first time, it doesn't feel like the kind of place where people are told they don't belong. Elijah glanced at the stage at the far end of the room, where a banner read, We belong here. Are you ready? He asked. Sophia nodded, though her heart raced. I've been ready for years. I just didn't know it. As guests filled the room, a quiet hum of anticipation settled over the crowd. Sophia stepped onto the stage, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, activists, community leaders, and ordinary people who had come to share and listen. Good evening, Sophia began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Thank you for being here tonight. This event is about more than what happened to me. It's about the countless stories of people who felt invisible, overlooked, or unworthy. Stories that deserve to be heard. She paused, glancing at Elijah, who gave her an encouraging nod. When I walked into this restaurant weeks ago, I was here to celebrate. But instead, I was reminded of something I've faced my whole life. The quiet, insidious ways the world tries to tell you that you don't belong, that you're not enough. But tonight, we're saying something different. Tonight, we're saying we belong here. All of us. The room erupted in applause as Sophia stepped back, tears welling in her eyes. She felt lighter, as though years of weight had finally begun to lift. One by one, guests took the stage to share their experiences. Jasmine Carter spoke first, recounting the day she was turned away from a boutique because the staff assumed she couldn't afford anything. I was too shocked to say anything at the time, Jasmine said, her voice trembling. But tonight, I'm saying it loud and clear. We all deserve to be treated with respect. The audience clapped, many nodding in agreement. Next was an older man named David, who had been denied a promotion after years of dedicated service. They said I wasn't management material, David said, his tone bitter. But the truth is, they didn't want someone like me in their boardroom. And I let it slide. Until now. As more stories unfolded, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier, but also more resolute. Each account brought a fresh wave of determination to the crowd. After the final speaker stepped off the stage, Elijah stood, his imposing frame drawing the room's attention. My mother taught me to stand up for what's right, he began, his voice commanding yet filled with warmth. She taught me that silence is never the answer. And tonight, we're proving that. But this can't stop here. It's not enough to share our stories. We need to act. Elijah gestured toward a table stacked with pamphlets and sign-up sheets. We're building something bigger, he continued. A network to support people facing discrimination. Resources for legal help, advocacy, and mentorship. This is just the beginning. The applause that followed was thunderous, and as Elijah stepped down, several people flocked to the table to sign up. As the dinner wound down, Sophia moved through the crowd, shaking hands and listening to words of gratitude. One woman, an elderly grandmother, grasped Sophia's hands tightly. "Thank you for this," she said, her voice breaking. "For giving us a chance to be heard." Sophia smiled warmly. "This isn't just for me. It's for all of us." When the last guest had left, Sophia and Elijah stood in the now empty dining room. The banner still hung above the stage, a symbol of what they had accomplished. "You did good, Mom," Elijah said softly. "We did good," Sophia replied, leaning into her son. As they stepped outside into the crisp night air, Sophia looked back at the restaurant one last time. For the first time since that humiliating night, she felt at peace. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice firm. Elijah smiled. "It's just the beginning." The morning sunlight streamed into Sophia's cozy kitchen as she sat at the table, her laptop open and a steaming cup of coffee beside her. Pages of handwritten notes were scattered across the surface, filled with memories, emotions, and the voices of those who had shared their stories at the dinner. Sophia stared at the blank document on the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She took a deep breath and began to type. The night at the restaurant was meant to be a celebration. Instead, it became a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel invisible. As the words flowed, Sophia felt a sense of clarity. Her book, The Taste of Respect, wasn't just about her experience. It was about resilience, hope, and the collective strength of those who dared to demand more. A knock at the door broke her concentration. Elijah stepped in, his presence filling the room. "How's it coming?" he asked, glancing at the screen. Sophia smiled. "It's not just a book, Elijah. It's a promise." Later that afternoon, Sophia and Elijah sat side by side in the green room of a local television studio. Their upcoming interview had attracted significant attention, and the buzz in the air was palpable. The producer peeked in. "We're ready for you too." Sophia smoothed the hem of her blouse, and Elijah gave her a reassuring nod. "Let's show them what we're made of, Mom." On stage, the host greeted them warmly. "Sophia, Elijah, thank you for being here," she began. "Your story has captivated the nation, sparking conversations about inclusion and respect. Sophia, how does it feel to know your experience has made such an impact?" Sophia took a moment, her gaze steady. "It's overwhelming, but it's also necessary. What happened to me isn't unique, and that's the real issue. This movement isn't about one night. It's about creating a world where no one is made to feel small." Elijah chimed in. "It's about turning pain into power. My mom taught me that silence isn't an option, and now we're showing others how to use their voices." The interview ended with applause, and as they stepped off stage, Sophia felt lighter. They were making waves, and the tide was turning. Back at home, Sophia opened a box of letters that had arrived in the days following the dinner. Some were handwritten, others typed, but all carried the same theme: gratitude. One letter caught her eye. "Dear Mrs. Lane, I watched your story unfold and felt like you were speaking directly to me. I've spent my life being quiet, afraid to stand up for myself. But after seeing you and Elijah, I finally found the courage to speak up at work. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Thank you for showing me that I matter. Maya. Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she folded the letter. Elijah walked in and saw the stack of envelopes. More letters? Sophia nodded. Each one reminds me why this work is so important. We're not just changing lives. We're giving people the courage to change their own. The fallout for Henry Darrow had been swift. The once coveted Lumirevoir was now a ghost of its former self, its reputation irreparably damaged. Articles exposing Henry's discriminatory practices and personal vendettas had surfaced, painting a damning picture. Sophia read the latest headline aloud to Elijah. Owner of exclusive restaurant faces backlash for decades of prejudice. Elijah smirked. Looks like he's finally facing the music. Sophia sighed. It's not about revenge, Elijah. It's about accountability. Henry had every chance to do the right thing, and he chose not to. Now he has to live with the consequences. Though she felt a sense of justice, Sophia's heart was heavy. She had known Henry once, and seeing his fall was a reminder of the harm bitterness and prejudice could cause. A month later, Sophia stood in the wings of a packed auditorium, waiting to take the stage. Elijah stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, Mom," he said. She smiled. "We've got this." As she stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. Sophia took her place at the podium, the bright lights illuminating her face. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight, we continue what started as a painful moment and turned into a powerful movement. We are here to say that everyone deserves respect, dignity, and a place at the table." Her speech flowed effortlessly, drawing nods and applause from the crowd. When she finished, Elijah joined her on stage, holding up a flyer for their new foundation. "We belong here." "This isn't the end of the story," Elijah said. "It's the beginning of a new chapter." As the crowd rose to their feet, Sophia felt a surge of hope. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led to something greater, a movement that would continue to grow, fueled by courage and unity.